Hello and welcome to another business strategy video. I'm Professor Kuban, and today we're going to be discussing economies of scale. All right, to get started, we need a definition. Now, like many things in business, the definition's right there in the name. Economies of scale is when we have additional economies possible through additional scale. All right, I'll give you something a little more in depth. Economies of scale is when we lower our costs per unit due to additional efficiencies possible through additional scale of operations. Now note that scale is always defined by an arbitrary but consistent for comparison time period. So it could be units per month, quarter, how many units you're making a day or an hour, a year. As long as you're consistent, it's the difference in scale between those two comparable periods that we're talking about. Now, to talk about scale, we are going to use a simplified example of starting a lemonade stand. So to do that, we first need a recipe for lemonade. So here's a nice, delicious recipe handed down through the generations. You need lemon juice, sugar, and water. You gotta heat the sugar to dissolve because we like sweet with our tart. We're gonna have to squeeze 20 large lemons to create the juice. Mix it all together with additional water. Ice it up, serve, and profit. Now that we know how to make our lemonade, let's look at the labor and food costs. Heating the water is going to take us 10 minutes to dissolve the sugar. Then we're starting small. We're hand squeezing these lemons. It's going to take us 20 minutes or a minute per lemon. At $15 an hour, that means it's going to cost $7.50 in labor to create our gallon of lemonade. Add in the cost of sugar and lemons, we're at $13 a gallon. Thankfully, the current value of lemonade is $2 a glass or $16 per gallon, so we will be profitable. So here are those numbers at various scales. We have no benefits as we move up, other than perhaps stronger grip strength from hand squeezing 1,000 gallons of lemonade. Our profit is very linear. So now let's introduce some production equipment technology. The juicer. All right, now with this juicer, it costs $100, but it allows us to squeeze our lemons in half the time. So we're saving on our lemon labor cost. Now, because of the initial cost of $100, it is not profitable at lower volumes. We're losing money at 1 gallon, 10 gallons, but at 100 gallons, we now are making more money than we were before. And this continues on to 1,000 gallons. So let's take this to the next step. The mega juicer. This is 5 times as fast as that puny juicer we had before, but it also costs 8 times as much. So now at $800, this juicer is not for low volume lemonade stands. We'd be losing a lot of money over here. Even at 100 gallons, we're still not even breaking even. We're still negative. But at 1,000 gallons, our profits have gone up even higher. Now let's summarize those differences. At lower scales, it didn't make sense to pay for the equipment that could speed up our labor. We didn't have the volume to support it. We would lose money. So at 1 and 10 gallons, we just keep hand squeezing. But once we get to 100 gallons, it makes sense to pay $100 to speed up our lemon squeezing process and save the labor, because the labor savings offsets the additional expense and increases our profit by 50%. Meanwhile, at 1,000 gallons, it makes sense to go to the even bigger machine that is, again, saving additional labor but has an even higher price. At this point, we've now over doubled our profits. And this is the advantage that you can get from scale. As you get bigger and bigger, you can get these additional efficiencies that don't make sense at lower scale. So here is that same information graphed. So you can see the marginal cost for the production technology is very high over here on the left. But as we move forward in volume, first our juicer passes where our hand squeezing rates are and drops to lower and lower prices. And then similarly, the mega juicer farther out on the scale curve moves to lower and lower unit cost. So as we saw in the previous example, scale allows us to spread out our fixed costs. And as scale increases, we're spreading that cost across more and more units. Now, to offset the cost of purchasing production equipment with its savings per unit, you have to reach a minimum scale. Thus, firms with less scale cannot take advantage of that equipment and are somewhat penalized on their per unit cost that they can reach. Because of this, production investment is often lumpy, where you have to reach a certain amount of scale to buy the next machine. And that is good for a certain range of scale, and then the capacity of that machine will be exceeded, and there'll be some larger, more expensive machine that can continue down that path. Now, eventually, that path runs out, and you've reached the point of diminishing returns where it's not going to get any better. But for a while, you'll have this sort of lumpy investment that gets you more profit per unit by lower cost per unit. Now, similarly, non-production costs such as R&D, advertising, distribution, finance, administration, they're also spread out more and more as the scale increases. And so you can take all of your fixed costs, whether it's production or not production, and spread it out thinner and thinner as your scale goes up. As an example of this, here is the scale economies in advertising. Coca-Cola spends more money in advertising than any of its rivals. In 2018, it was $5.8 billion. Pepsi, the second closest, was $2 billion behind that. But because of the huge additional volume that Coke has, they have a lower advertising cost per case of soda than most of their competitors. Pepsi is slightly lower because they advertise slightly less per case, but most of these smaller firms with much lower scale, even though they're spending a lot less in advertising, their scale is so much lower that the cost per unit is still much higher. Now, the other thing that scale allows is the specialization of tasks and people. As scale increases, you can get more employees. So rather than a single person making, marketing, selling our lemonade and keeping up with all the administrative tasks, we can have employees for each area. Now, the specialization allows increased productivity because those people become very good at doing something again and again. And they may have additional expertise that can come through training or education. So for instance, someone could have a degree in marketing instead of just so happening to open a lemonade stand, and suddenly you're also the marketing department. Similarly, this allows for specialization of equipment. Firm with large volumes can purchase and use specialized equipment that does one job very well, one job faster and cheaper than other equipment that tends to be more geared towards multiple uses, so that it can be useful for smaller firms that can't afford multiple specialized equipment because they can't justify the expense. Finally, why does this matter? So even if your firm is not engaging itself in a lot of scale, economies of scale is fundamentally how volume discounts work, how they're possible. So even if your firm doesn't do it, your buyers may still want volume discounts. Your suppliers may offer you a volume discount, and this is how it's happening. So understanding that allows you to have a better sense of dealing with your buyers and suppliers. Kickstarter and Indiegogo primarily exist and make a lot of money because they are helping firms achieve large enough scale through pre-orders to achieve a large enough scale that they can get their prices low enough, whether they are building them themselves or just farming it out to a shop in China to make for them. They still have to have a certain number of scale to get the unit cost low enough that they can compete with other people in the market that are already selling a similar product. So customers are going to have an expectation of what they're willing to pay, and you have to get your prices below that with scale so that you can make a profit. So take, for instance, if we change our former example of lemonade to the going rate is now $10 a gallon versus $16 a gallon. Now your scale is such that you have to make 600 gallons of lemonade to be able to have the scale to break even, let alone make any profit. So this creates a barrier to entry for anyone who can't sell that much lemonade or can't buy the machine, the mega juicer, that allows you to be profitable at the higher scales. So that creates that barrier to entry that we talk about in Porter's 5 Forces. And this is where Kickstarter can come in and say, well, what we're going to do is we're going to help you bring together a lot of customers so you can get the scale and know that it's there, and then buy the machine and make the unit cost low enough that you can turn around and sell at $10 and still make a profit. Hey, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to smash that like button, leave a positive comment below, or just praise me on your favorite social media. Until next time.